The glass shattered before anyone could stop it. It hit the marble floor of the Morty estate's grand dining room and exploded into 100 gleaming pieces, and not a single person at that long, candlelit table moved. Not the guests, not the servers lined against the wall like statues. Not even the woman standing at the center of the room, her silver hair pinned perfectly, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light as she pointed one manicured finger at the young maid who had just stumbled. "You clumsy, worthless girl," Elena Morty said, and her voice was the kind of quiet that was louder than screaming. "Do you have any idea what that crystal cost?" The maid, a young woman named Sophia, stood with her back straight and her eyes down, shards of glass glittering around her worn shoes. She had been carrying a tray of water glasses when one of the guests had pushed back their chair without warning, catching her at the hip. The glass had fallen, that was all, an accident. The kind that happened in any house where people lived and breathed, and moved through space without thinking about the people carrying things around them. But this was not any house, and Elena Morty did not believe in accidents. "Apologize," Elena said, stepping closer. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of a string quartet playing somewhere down the corridor. "Get on your knees and apologize to my guests." Sophia's chin lifted slightly, just slightly, almost imperceptible. But someone noticed. At the far end of the table, barely visible in the shadow where he had chosen to sit, rather than at the head where his mother had placed his name card, Dante Morty watched. He had not spoken in 2 hours. He had eaten nothing. He had simply sat in that particular stillness of his, the kind of stillness that other men in the room had learned to fear, the kind that meant he was watching everything and deciding, in some private courtroom behind his eyes, what everything meant and what it deserved. He watched his mother take another step toward the maid. He watched Sophia's hands, which were clasped in front of her, tighten almost imperceptibly. He watched, and he did not move, and then something happened that he had not seen coming, something small and ordinary, and somehow more devastating than anything he had witnessed in years of running an empire built on power and silence, and the particular violence of men who never raised their voices. The maid looked up, not at his mother, not at the guests who were pretending to examine their wine glasses with great interest. She looked directly at him. Across the entire length of that enormous room, across the candles and the crystal and the cold marble and the unbearable theater of his mother's cruelty, Sophia looked directly into Dante Morty's eyes, and she did not look away. The Morty name had been spoken in this city for 3 generations with a particular kind of reverence that sat somewhere between admiration and terror. Dante's grandfather had built the foundation in concrete and silence, a man who understood that real power never announced itself. His father had expanded it, refined it, dressed it in silk, and sent it to better schools. And Dante had taken what they built and turned it into something that operated on an entirely different level, the kind of operation that governments pretended not to know about while quietly relying on its outcomes. He was 34 years old. He had never married. He had never, as far as anyone could observe, been in love. He kept his world tightly controlled, his emotions, his schedule, his image, the careful geography of who was allowed near him and how close. People who worked for him learned quickly that there were rules that were never spoken because they did not need to be. You did not ask Dante Morty personal questions. You did not make decisions he had not authorized. You did not bring him problems, you brought him solutions. And you did not, under any circumstances, mistake his silence for permission. The estate had been his mother's domain since his father's death 8 years ago. Elena Morty had turned grief into architecture. She had redecorated every room, dismissed every servant his father had trusted, rebuilt the household in her own image. Dante had allowed it. The estate was her world. He spent as little time there as possible, returning only when protocol required it. Dinners like this one, where Elena invited people whose money she wanted to touch or whose influence she wanted to borrow, and Dante sat at the table because his presence alone was worth more than anything she could say. He understood his function. He performed it without complaint. What he did not perform was warmth. Sophia had come to work at the estate 3 months ago, recommended by a domestic agency his mother's assistant used. She was 27 years old. She had no family in the city. She had come from the coast, from a small town where the sea was the most impressive thing, and where she had left behind something she never spoke about. The other maids had noticed that she kept a small photograph in the drawer beside her narrow bed, but never looked at it when anyone was watching. They had noticed that she worked longer hours than anyone asked her to. They had noticed that she was kind quietly, consistently kind without being soft. Elena Morty had noticed something else. She had noticed that Sophia did not flinch. Most of the staff learned within the first week how to disappear, how to become part of the furniture, how to exist in the house without taking up the kind of space that might attract attention. Sophia had not learned this, or rather, she had learned it and chosen not to perform it. She moved through the house with a composed dignity that Elena found offensive in a way she struggled to articulate, even to herself. The girl was not rude. She was not slow. She completed every task precisely and without complaint. She simply refused to make herself small. And for Elena Morty, a woman who had spent 50 years making other people small in order to feel large, this was unforgivable. The broken glass incident had not been an accident, not really, at least not in the way that mattered. It had been an opportunity, a chance to do, in front of witnesses, what Elena had been wanting to do for 3 months, to make the girl kneel, to hear her apologize, to put her back where Elena believed she belonged. "I'm waiting," Elena said. Sophia's eyes dropped from Dante's face. She looked at his mother. Her voice, when it came, was low and even and completely steady. "I will replace the glass," Sophia said. "The spill was caused by a chair moving unexpectedly. I'm sorry for the disruption." It was a perfect response. Calm, professional, appropriate. It acknowledged the situation without accepting a humiliation she did not deserve. Elena Morty's eyes went cold. "That is not what I asked you to do." The silence that followed was the kind that pressed against the walls. 2 of the guests shifted in their chairs. A server near the door stared very hard at a point above everyone's heads. The string quartet down the corridor played on, oblivious, some piece of Vivaldi that now sounded unbearably cruel in its brightness. Dante set down his wine glass. The small sound of crystal meeting table was, in that room at that moment, louder than a gunshot. Every head turned toward him. He stood. He did not push his chair back dramatically. He did not raise his voice. He simply unfolded himself from the chair with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once in his life needed to rush to be taken seriously, and he walked the length of the table. His mother watched him come. Something moved behind her eyes, something that might have been calculation, and might have been the very first hint of uncertainty. Dante stopped beside Sophia. He did not look at her. He looked at his mother. "The dinner is over," he said. 3 words, quietly spoken, utterly absolute. Elena opened her mouth. "The dinner," Dante said again, still quiet, still looking only at his mother, "is over." The guests began with visible relief to find reasons to stand and gather their things. The servers moved. The room began to disassemble itself around them with the efficiency of people who understood that when Dante Morty made a decision, the appropriate response was immediate compliance. Elena Morty did not move. She stood very still, her eyes on her son's face, and for one charged moment the 2 of them existed in a private war that had nothing to do with broken glass and everything to do with 34 years of history that neither of them ever spoke about. Then she turned and walked away. Dante stood in the emptying room. Around his feet, the shards of broken crystal caught the light. Sophia had not moved. She was still standing in the same place, her hands clasped, her back straight, and when the last guest had filtered out and the room was quiet, she finally looked up at him. He was already looking at her. "Clean this up," he said. His voice was exactly what it always was, flat, contained, offering nothing. And then he turned and walked out of the room. Sophia stood alone in the candlelight, surrounded by broken glass. She let out a breath that she had been holding for what felt like hours, and then she knelt down and began to pick up the pieces. She did not see him again for 3 days. The Morty estate had a library that no one used. It sat at the end of the east wing, behind a door that was always slightly ajar, and inside it smelled of old paper and something darker, cedar, perhaps, or the particular scent of wood that had absorbed decades of silence. The shelves ran floor to ceiling, and there was a rolling ladder on a brass rail that had not been moved in years. And in the center of the room there were 2 leather chairs facing a fireplace that was only lit in winter. Sophia had discovered it on her 2nd week at the estate. She came in the early mornings, before the house woke up, before Elena Morty's day began its particular theater of demands and small cruelties. She did not read the books, or rather, she read them with the distracted attention of someone whose mind kept sliding off the page and back to something she was not ready to think about directly. She sat in the left-hand chair and held whatever book she had pulled from the shelf, and let the quiet of the room settle around her like something she could almost rest inside. It was the closest thing she had to peace. On the 4th morning after the dinner, she came in as usual, pulled a book she had already read twice without retaining a single word, and sat down. The fire was not lit. The room was cold in the way that old stone buildings are cold, not unpleasant, just honest. She tucked her feet under her in the chair, which she knew she should not do, which she did anyway because at 5 in the morning, in a room no one ever entered, she allowed herself this one small rebellion. She had read 3 pages when she heard the door. She was on her feet before she had finished thinking about it, feet on the floor, book closed, hands folded, spine straight. The door opened. Dante Morty stood in the doorway. He was not dressed for the day. He wore dark trousers and a shirt that was not yet buttoned at the collar, and his hair, which was always precisely ordered in every public context she had observed him in, was not precisely ordered. He looked like a man who had not slept. He looked for approximately 2 seconds before his face arranged itself, like a person, just a person, and then the arrangement happened, and he was Dante Morty again. He looked at her, he looked at the chair she had clearly just vacated. He looked at the book in her hands. "This room is not part of your duties," he said. "No." Sophia agreed. Her voice was steady. "I come here before my shift begins. I'll leave." She moved toward the door. He did not move out of the doorway. She stopped. The distance between them was 3 feet of cold library air, and something considerably less measurable. "What are you reading?" he asked. The question surprised her. She could see that it surprised him slightly as well, a faint tension at the corner of his jaw, as if he had not entirely intended to ask it. She looked down at the book in her hands and turned it so the spine faced him. Giovanni's Room, James Baldwin. Something shifted in his expression, so small that if she had blinked she would have missed it. "That's not a happy book," he said. "No," Sophia said. "It isn't." Another silence. He stepped into the room, and she took this as her cue to leave, and moved again toward the door, and again something stopped her, not him, this time. Something else. Some instinct she could not name that made her pause with her hand almost on the doorframe and turn back. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did at dinner." He had moved to the window. He was looking out at the grounds in the gray early light, his back to her, and when she spoke he did not turn around. "I didn't do it for you," he said. The words were designed to close a door. She recognized that. She had spent enough of her life around people who used bluntness as a wall. "I know," she said, and left. Elena Morty summoned her that afternoon. The summons came through the housekeeper, a thin woman named Marta, who delivered messages with the expressionless efficiency of someone who had learned not to attach herself to their contents. Sophia was told to present herself to Mrs. Morty's private sitting room at 3 o'clock. She arrived at 2:58. Elena was seated at her writing desk, and she did not look up when Sophia entered, which Sophia understood was the first move in a game Elena had been playing for decades, the simple power of making people stand and wait while you pretended they were not there. Sophia stood. She waited. She did not shift her weight or clear her throat or perform the subtle, anxious signals that Elena was waiting for. After 90 seconds, Elena looked up. "I've been thinking," Elena said, setting down her pen with the deliberateness of someone who wants you to watch them set it down, "about your future here." "Yes, ma'am," Sophia said. "My son interfered the other night." Elena's voice was pleasant. That was the most dangerous thing about her, the pleasantness. "He sometimes does. He has a particular weakness for—" She paused, and her eyes moved over Sophia with an assessment that was not subtle and was not meant to be strays. Sophia said nothing. "He won't always be here," Elena continued. "He has his own home, his own life. What happens in this estate between these walls is mine to manage." She folded her hands on the desk. "I want to be certain that you understand that. I understand my role here, Mrs. Morty. Do you?" Elena tilted her head. "Because the girl I saw at dinner did not seem to fully understand her role. The girl at dinner seemed to believe that dignity was something she was entitled to. In my experience, dignity is something that is earned, and it is earned through—" She smiled, and it was a cold and perfect thing, through demonstrated understanding of one's place. The room was warm. Elena kept it warm. Fires lit even in mild weather, heavy curtains. The particular suffocating warmth of a woman who could afford to be comfortable at all times. Sophia stood in it and kept her face exactly as it was. "Is there something specific you'd like me to do differently?" Sophia asked. Elena's smile thinned. "I'd like you to remember," Elena said, "that my son's attention is not a shield, and that shields, even when they exist, can be taken away very quickly." It was a threat wrapped in 3 layers of civility. Sophia recognized every layer. "Thank you for letting me know," Sophia said, and meant absolutely nothing by it, and everything by it simultaneously. She left the room. In the corridor outside, she stood for a moment with her back against the wall, and her eyes closed, and her hands pressed flat against the cool plaster behind her. She breathed in, she breathed out. She thought about the coast, the smell of salt water, the way the light hit the sea in the early morning before anyone else was awake, when she used to sit on the rocks with her daughter and watch the sun come up and believe, completely and without any shadow of doubt, that everything was going to be fine. She stopped thinking about it. She pushed off the wall and went back to work. Dante returned to his own apartment in the city that evening. It was a penthouse in a building he owned. Half the building was offices, the other half residential, and the top floor was his. It was not a warm space. It had been designed by an architect whose reputation rested on clean lines and the strategic use of absence, and the result was a series of rooms that functioned perfectly and felt like the inside of a very expensive thought. Dark stone, floor-to-ceiling glass, light that came from everywhere and nowhere. A kitchen that was always stocked by people he never saw. He stood at the window with a glass of whiskey and looked out at the city spread below him like something he owned, which most of it was. He was thinking about a library. He was thinking, more specifically, about the particular stillness of a person in a cold room with a book they were clearly not reading, and the way that stillness had felt when he pushed open the door, like walking into something private and fragile that he had not expected to find. He was not a man who was caught off guard. He had arranged his entire life so that nothing could catch him off guard. He controlled the variables. He controlled the information. He controlled the temperature of every room he walked into, figuratively and often literally. He had not controlled that library at 5 in the morning. He had gone there, and this was the part he did not examine too closely. He had gone there because he could not sleep. And when he could not sleep, he sometimes walked the east wing of the estate, because his father had kept his study there, and the faint scent of his father's pipe tobacco still existed somewhere in the walls if you were quiet enough, and it was late enough and you were willing to feel things you generally preferred not to feel. He had not expected to find her there. He had not expected, when he found her, to ask what she was reading. He set down the whiskey glass, he picked it up again, he looked at the city, Giovanni's room, a book about love that destroys people, about the terrible damage done by a man who cannot let himself want what he actually wants. He had read it at 20, too, in a different life, when he was still the kind of person who read novels and felt their edges pressing against his own life. He had not thought about it in years. He thought about it now. He thought about her voice when she said, "I know," 2 words that had landed in his chest with a quiet weight he was still feeling 3 hours later. And this was so unusual that he stood at his window for a long time afterward, examining the feeling the way you might examine an object you had found in your pocket, with no memory of putting it there. His phone rang. He answered it. There was business to attend to. There was always business to attend to. He set the feeling aside and answered, but it was still there when he fell asleep at 2 in the morning. And it was still there when he woke up 4 hours later, with the particular heaviness of a man who has dreamed about something he cannot quite remember and knows, with some deep animal instinct, that the forgetting is a mercy. He came back to the estate the following Friday. He had not planned to. He had a meeting in the city on Saturday morning, and staying at the estate made logistical sense, and he told himself this as he drove the 40 minutes from the city with his driver, sitting in the back of the car and reading through reports that he retained with perfect efficiency and zero real attention. He arrived at 7 in the evening. His mother was hosting a small lunch the next day, and the house was in the particular state of controlled preparation that Elena Morty called order and everyone else called anxiety. Flowers being arranged in the front rooms, silver being polished, the kitchen running at a sustained intensity that Dante registered as background music as he walked to his rooms. He did not see Sophia. He told himself he had not been looking. He went to his room, showered, changed, and went down to the small dining room his mother used for family meals. She still insisted on dinner whenever he stayed, still set the table with the same silver and the same careful attention that she had deployed when his father was alive, and the word family had meant something different than it did now. They sat across from each other. The conversation was what it always was, a surface and maneuvering, performed warmth that both of them saw through and maintained anyway out of a habit so long. Established, it had calcified into something neither of them could dismantle. Elena asked about his work. He gave her the version she was allowed to have. She told him about the lunch, about her guests, about the renovation she was planning in the South Garden. He listened with the portion of his attention he kept available for listening. And then, between the first course and the second, the door opened and Sophia entered with a dish, and Dante's eyes moved to her the way eyes move toward light in a dark room, involuntarily, completely, before he had the chance to instruct them otherwise. She set the dish on the sideboard without looking at him. She began serving his mother, and Elena, who noticed everything, said nothing and smiled at her son over the rim of her wineglass with an expression he did not like at all. The argument began, as the worst ones always do, over something small. It was Saturday morning, 2 hours before Elena's lunch guests were due to arrive, and the house was at its most frantic, that particular domestic pressure that built in the walls of large estates, when appearances were about to be made and every surface and every person in the building was expected to reflect perfectly on the woman who owned it all. Sophia had been arranging flowers in the entrance hall. She was good at it. She had learned from her mother years ago on the coast the particular grammar of flowers, how they spoke to each other in a vase, which ones needed space and which ones leaned naturally toward company. She was finishing a tall arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus when Elena appeared at the top of the stairs. "Those are wrong," Elena said without breaking her dissent. Sophia looked at the flowers, then at Elena. "The roses were placed according to your housekeeper's instructions." Sophia said, "My housekeeper is not hosting this lunch. I am." Elena reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped beside the arrangement and looked at it with the expression of a woman who had decided before she arrived what she was going to find wrong. "Take them out, all of them, start again with the peonies, and make sure the stems are cut properly this time. Whoever did them last week left them too long." "Of course," Sophia said. She began to remove the roses, and the vase, Elena added, "Use the crystal, not this." She gestured at the simple ceramic vessel Sophia had chosen, which was elegant and well proportioned and perfectly suited to the arrangement. This looks like something from a hotel lobby. Sophia set the roses aside. She went to the cabinet where the crystal vases were kept and selected the appropriate one and brought it back and began again, cutting the peonies with the small silver scissors, measuring the stems, reconstructing the arrangement with quiet, methodical precision. Elena watched. This was the part Sophia had learned to endure the watching. Elena did not watch to help or to advise. She watched in the way a person watches when they are waiting for something to go wrong, so that they can be the one to identify it. It was a particular kind of attention that felt less like being seen and more like being hunted. "You're placing them too tightly," Elena said. Sophia said nothing. She adjusted, too loose now. Sophia adjusted again. "Do you actually know what you're doing?" Elena said, and her voice had dropped into that register. The quiet, almost conversational register of genuine contempt. "Or are you simply performing competence?" Sophia set down the scissors. She looked at the arrangement. She looked at Elena. "I believe the arrangement is correct, Mrs. Morty," she said. Her voice was even, her hands were still. "You believe?" Elena repeated, tasting the word like it was slightly spoiled. "That's very charming. The help, believing things." She stepped closer. "Let me explain something to you, since apparently no one has been sufficiently clear. You are here because I allow you to be here. You exist in this house because I permit it. And when I tell you that something is wrong, the appropriate response is not your belief, it is your compliance." The entrance hall was quiet. Marta had appeared in the doorway of the corridor, registered what was happening, and retreated. A young kitchen assistant, who had been crossing the hall with a tray of linens, had stopped, pressed against the wall, invisible. Sophia's hands were very still at her sides. This was the moment. She knew this moment, had felt it coming for 3 months, in every small exchange, in every layered instruction, in every smile that didn't reach Elena Morty's eyes. This was the moment the woman had been building toward, and it was happening now, in front of witnesses, designed to be witnessed, designed to land in a specific way. "I understand, Mrs. Morty," Sophia said. And her voice was still even, and her hands were still, and her eyes were steady and direct. And this was the thing that lit Elena's expression from the inside with something cold and bright, because the girl was not breaking. "You understand," Elena said. She let the silence sit for a moment. "Then my son will not always be here to rescue you. I think we've discussed this, and I think the time has come for you to make a decision about whether this position is truly suited to someone with your particular," she paused, and the pause was surgical, limitations. It was a dismissal wrapped in a question. Sophia opened her mouth, and from the top of the stairs a voice said, "Enough." Both women looked up. Dante stood at the top of the stairs. He was dressed for the day, dark suit, no tie, the particular immaculate authority of a man who wore expensive things the way other people wore armor. He was looking down at them with an expression that was, as always, completely unreadable, but he was there. And he had heard, and in the architecture of this house, his presence at the top of those stairs, with that word in the air between them, was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. He descended the stairs slowly. Elena straightened. Sophia did not move. Dante stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the flower arrangement on the table. He looked at it for a long moment with the focused attention he gave to things he was actually examining, not performing the examination of. "It's well done," he said, to no one in particular, to the room. Then he looked at his mother. "Your guests arrive in 2 hours," he said. "I'd suggest you use the time accordingly." Elena Morty looked at her son. Something moved in her face, not quite anger, not quite hurt. Something older and more complicated than either of those things. "You're undermining me," she said, quietly, just for him. "I'm attending a lunch." Dante said, "That's all." He walked past her. He walked past Sophia. His arm came within inches of her shoulder as he passed, and neither of them moved toward or away, and the distance between them was nothing and everything. And then he was through the door to the corridor and gone. The entrance hall breathed again. Elena looked at Sophia. Her face was composed now, the mask back in place. The performance resumed. "Finish the arrangement," she said, and walked away. Sophia turned back to the flowers. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely still anymore. She pressed them flat against the table for a moment, breathed, pressed the feeling down into whatever place she kept things she could not afford to feel during working hours. Then she picked up the scissors and finished the arrangement. It was, even she could admit, beautiful. The lunch was 12 people at a long table in the formal dining room, and it lasted 3 hours, and Dante sat through it with the patience of a man serving a sentence he had accepted the terms of. Long ago, he watched his mother perform. Elena Morty at a social function was a different creature from Elena Morty in private, warmer, wittier, more generous with her attention. She asked people questions and remembered their answers. She laughed at the right moments. She created the particular atmosphere of effortless elegance that had made her a sought after hostess for 30 years. Dante could acknowledge without warmth but with a certain precision that his mother was talented. She understood people in the way that a surgeon understands anatomy, not from affection, but from close and clinical study of how things worked and what happened when you pressed in the right places. She had studied him the same way. He understood this. He ate. He answered questions directed at him. He allowed the conversation to move around him the way water moves around a stone. He did not redirect it. He simply was not moved by it. Sophia served the courses with 2 other members of the staff. He did not look at her directly. He was aware of her the way you are aware of a sound in a quiet room, not the focus of your attention, but present in the edges of your perception with a clarity that was almost physical. She moved efficiently. She was composed when Elena made a small comment to one of the guests about the flower arrangement and attributed it to our staff's rather surprising occasional competence. Sophia, who was pouring water at that precise moment, did not pause in her pouring, did not change the angle of her wrist, did not give Elena the satisfaction of any visible reaction whatsoever. Dante watched this from across the room with an attention he kept carefully off his face. One of the guests, a man named Ferrero, who had money in 3 of Dante's legitimate operations, and liked to believe this made them friends, leaned toward him between the 3rd and 4th courses, and said in the confiding tone of a man who thought he was being charming, the dark-haired one, "Is she new?" Dante looked at him. Ferrero's smile faltered slightly. "I only meant she works here," Dante said. His voice was pleasant. It was the pleasantness of a closed door. Ferrero nodded and found something very interesting to look at in his wine glass. After the guests had gone, and the house was in the gentle aftermath of a large social event, the relaxing of tension, the systematic restoration of order, Dante went to the study his father had used and had never been changed and never would be changed, and he sat in his father's chair and put his feet on his father's desk and looked at the ceiling. He was tired in a way that was not about sleep. He thought about Ferrero's question, "Is she new?" as if she were furniture, as if the relevant fact about a person was their newness. He thought about the water not pausing in its pouring. He thought about 3 months of his mother's particular campaign of reduction, and the way Sophia had stood inside it without letting it reshape her. He thought about the word limitations, and he felt, in the carefully maintained order of his interior landscape, something that he had very little practice identifying because he had spent years making sure he had very little need to identify it. It was anger, not the cold functional anger that he used in business. That was a tool, precise and purposeful. This was something older, something that lived further down. He put his feet on the floor. He stood up. He went to find her. She was in the garden. The lunch had ended at 4, and it was nearly 5 now, the light going golden and long across the grounds, and Sophia was sitting on the low stone wall at the edge of the rose garden with her face turned up toward the last of the warmth and her eyes closed. She had changed out of her uniform. She was wearing her own clothes, a simple dark sweater and trousers, and she had her hair down, and she looked entirely different and entirely the same, and Dante stopped on the path when he saw her and stood very still. She heard him. Her eyes opened. She did not scramble to her feet. She did not adopt any particular professional posture. She simply looked at him, and the last of the afternoon light caught the planes of her face, and there was something in her expression, not fear, not calculation, not the careful social monitoring he was used to seeing in people's faces when they looked at him, that he could not immediately name. He walked toward her. He stopped when he reached the wall, a few feet away, and he looked at the rose garden for a moment because it was easier than looking at her directly. "How long has she been doing this?" he asked. Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Since I arrived," she said. He turned to look at her then, fully. She met his eyes without flinching, which was, he had come to understand, simply what she did, not a performance of courage, just the absence of the particular reflex that made most people look away. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. To whom? The question landed simply, without accusation or self-pity. Just the honest architecture of it. To whom? Because in this house, in this power structure, there was no one to say anything to, and they both knew it. He sat down on the wall, not close, a careful distance, but he sat, which was unusual. He stood in rooms. He moved through rooms. He did not often simply sit in gardens in the late afternoon light next to people. "She won't stop," he said. "I know." Sophia said, "I can remove you from her direct supervision, shift your duties, and she'll find another way." Sophia said it without bitterness. Just fact. He looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the particular composure that he had been watching for weeks and was only now close enough to see the cost of, because there was a cost. He could see it now in the faint tension around her eyes, in the way she was holding herself, in the way you hold something you're afraid might break if you relax. "You're exhausted," he said. The word surprised her. He could see it. She turned to look at him, and for a moment her composure cracked, not dramatically, not with tears or declarations, just a hairline fracture. The faintest shimmer of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. "I'm fine," she said, and he said nothing, and the silence between them was not the silence of two people with nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who were suddenly aware that they were sitting very close to the edge of something neither of them had planned for, and neither of them was sure they could afford. The sun dropped behind the tree line. The garden went cool and blue. Neither of them moved, and then Sophia said quietly, looking at her hands in her lap, "She called my daughter." The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Dante became very still. 3 weeks ago, Sophia said. Her voice was controlled, every syllable held in its place with visible effort. "My daughter is 9 years old. She lives with my sister on the coast. Mrs. Morty found the number. I don't know how. She called and told my sister that I had been caught stealing from the estate and would be dismissed without a reference." She stopped. The garden was absolutely quiet. "My sister called me, terrified. My daughter had overheard part of the conversation and didn't understand and was." She stopped again, pressed her lips together. "It took me 2 hours to calm them down. 2 hours on the phone that evening after my shift, explaining that it wasn't true, that I hadn't done anything wrong, that everything was fine." She looked up. Her eyes were dry. "That is why I didn't say anything," she said. "Because I have a 9-year-old daughter who depends on this income and a position I cannot afford to lose, and the woman doing this knows it." Dante looked at her. The last light was almost gone now, and in the half-dark of the garden, her face was still composed, and her eyes were still dry, and she was still holding herself with that extraordinary precision. And something happened in his chest that he had no framework for, something that moved through the careful architecture of his interior life like a structural crack. He said her name for the first time, Sophia, just that one word, her name, in a voice that was not his professional voice or his authoritative voice or any of the voices he deployed in the management of his world. Just her name in his real voice. She looked at him, and what was in her eyes then was something that neither of them would have been able to name, and neither of them tried. And then his phone rang. He looked at it, let it ring, looked back at her. It rang again. He answered it. He stood. He spoke in rapid, quiet Italian to whoever was on the other end, and his face became the face it usually was: closed, contained, operational. He moved away along the path, speaking, and Sophia watched him go, and the garden settled into its evening quiet around her. She sat there for a long time after he was gone. She pressed one hand over her sternum, where something was happening that she absolutely could not allow to happen. She pressed it down. She went inside. The photograph was small. It lived in the drawer beside Sophia's bed, face down, the way you store something you need to keep but cannot always bear to look at. She had carried it from the coast when she left, folded into the inside pocket of her bag between her identity documents and the emergency cash she kept in an envelope. The things you take when you are leaving somewhere and not entirely sure when you will return. It was a photograph of a girl on a beach. 9 years old now, but 7 in the photograph, sitting on a flat rock with her knees pulled up to her chest and her dark hair blowing sideways in the sea wind, and her face turned 3/4 away from the camera, looking at something in the water that had caught her attention. She was not smiling. She was simply looking. With that particular focused intensity that she had had since she was an infant, this absolute absorption in whatever was directly in front of her, this quality of presence that Sophia had always privately believed was the finest thing about her daughter, and the thing that frightened her most. Because a child who was fully present in the world was a child who could be fully hurt by it. Her name was Katerina. She called her Kate. Sophia called her every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock from the small courtyard behind the estate's kitchen, standing in whatever weather the evening produced, because the signal was better outside, and because she did not want the other staff to overhear, not because she was ashamed of her daughter. She was never, had never been, could never be ashamed of her daughter, but because Kate was hers, privately and completely, in a life that did not offer many things that were private and complete. She had left the coast 10 months ago. The reasons were layered and interlocked in the way that the reasons for leaving somewhere always are: financial, practical, necessary. She did not have a husband. She had not had one for 3 years, since Marco had made a series of decisions that had dismantled their life with an efficiency that still, sometimes, startled her when she thought about it. Directly, he was not a bad man. He had simply been a man who wanted things he could not find in the life they had built, and the wanting had made him someone she no longer recognized, and by the time she recognized that she no longer recognized him, there was nothing left to save. He sent money sometimes, not enough and not reliably, but sometimes. Her sister, Julia, had taken Kate. This had been the arrangement temporary. They had all agreed temporary, just until Sophia established herself somewhere, found work that paid enough, built something she could bring Kate into. 10 months. The temporary had lasted 10 months, and Sophia had sent every euro she could spare and called every Sunday, and told her daughter that it was almost time, soon, not much longer now. She did not know if she was lying. She picked up the photograph on the night after the garden and held it in the dark of her small room and looked at her daughter's profile against the gray, blue sea, and felt the particular ache that she carried every day like a second skeleton, not dramatic, not debilitating, just constantly present. The awareness of the distance between herself and the most important thing in her life. She put the photograph back. She did not sleep for a long time. Dante did not sleep either. He was at his desk in the study by 11, which was not unusual. He often worked late, preferred the particular quality of the house at night, the way silence settled into the rooms and made thinking easier. He was working through the financial architecture of a deal that had been in negotiation for 4 months. A complex restructuring that required the kind of attention that left no room for anything else. He gave it no attention. He sat at his father's desk and stared at the documents in front of him and thought about a 9-year-old girl on the coast who had overheard a phone call and not understood. He thought about the particular mechanics of what his mother had done, not impulsively, not in the heat of anger, but deliberately with forethought, targeting something specific and soft. You did not find a private phone number for a Maid's sister without effort. You did not make that call without knowing exactly what you were doing. It was a campaign, systematic, patient, designed to dismantle a person through their most vulnerable point. He knew how his mother operated. He had grown up watching her operate. He understood the mechanisms of her power because he had spent 34 years navigating them, first as her child, and then as her son, and then as something more complicated. A man who had surpassed her in every measurable dimension of power, and still sat at her dinner table and allowed her performances because somewhere underneath all of it, she was his mother, and he did not know what to do with that. He had not known what she was capable of, or rather, he had known what she was capable of in the abstract. He had simply never seen it aimed at someone who did not have the resources to absorb it. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He picked it up again and called his head of security, a man named Aldo who had worked for the Morty family for 20 years and who answered calls at any hour without complaint because this was what he had agreed to, and because he was genuinely incapable of sleeping more than 4 hours a night. The staff records for this estate, Dante said, who has access. Standard access would be Mrs. Morty, the housekeeper, and HR administration. Aldo said. No pause, no question about why he was being asked this at 11:30 at night. I want an audit, everything accessed in the last 3 months, and I want the personal contact records for all current staff moved to my secure system only, effective immediately. A brief pause. Understood. One more thing. Dante looked at the fire, the maid, Sophia. He said her name carefully, neutrally. Has anyone made inquiries about her outside the estate? Another pause longer. I'll need to check the logs, Aldo said. I'll have something for you by morning. Tonight, Dante said. Yes, sir. He ended the call. He sat in the quiet study with his father's books around him, and the fire burning low, and the weight of what he was doing pressing gently against his chest. He was not a man who examined his own motivations in real time. He had learned early that this particular kind of introspection was a luxury that the life he lived could not safely accommodate. You decided, you acted, you assessed outcomes and adjusted. But tonight, in the particular honesty of late night and firelight, he allowed himself to notice something. He was not doing this purely because it was the right thing to do. He was doing it because the thought of her standing in her small room somewhere in this house with the knowledge of what had been done to her daughter was something he found he could not simply catalog and set aside. This was new information about himself. He looked at the fire for a long time. Marta found her the next morning. Sophia was in the laundry room, one of the lower duties she had been assigned after Elena's latest round of reorganization. A transparent demotion designed to communicate something through action, rather than words, and she was folding linens with the methodical focus she brought to everything. And Marta appeared in the doorway with an expression that Sophia could not immediately read. He wants to see you, Marta said, the study, now. Sophia set down the linen, she smoothed her uniform. She followed Marta through the house and up the stairs and to the study door, and Marta knocked once and opened it and stepped back, and Sophia walked in. Dante was standing at the window. He turned when she entered. The room was the same as it always was: dark wood, old books, the smell of cedar and paper, and the very faint ghost of pipe tobacco that Sophia had noticed the one time she had stood in the doorway and not entered. The fire was lit despite the relatively mild morning. On the desk, she noticed, there were papers, printed records of some kind, dense with information. Close the door, he said. She did. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. She waited. I want you to tell me. He said, if there have been other incidents, beyond what you told me yesterday. Sophia was quiet. Sophia. There have been other things, she said. Tell me, she told him, carefully, without embellishment, without the performance of grievance, just the facts of it, laid out in sequence. The reassignment of duties, each one slightly more menial than the last. The comments made in front of other staff, calibrated to undermine her authority without being explicit enough to constitute a formal complaint. The incident with the reference, not just the call to her sister, but a separate conversation Marta had overheard, in which Elena had told a friend who ran a domestic agency that Sophia was unreliable and light-fingered, effectively poisoning her prospects elsewhere in the city's private household sector. She watched his face as she spoke. It was very still, but his hands, which were clasped behind his back, tightened almost imperceptibly at the reference to the agency conversation. She noticed she continued. When she had finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. "She's been trying to trap you here," Dante said. Not a question. Working it out aloud, and this was unusual enough that Sophia registered it as significant. He was thinking in front of her. He did not typically do this with people. "Yes," Sophia said. "If I can't get a reference, and she's spoken to agencies in the city, leaving this position becomes very difficult, which means I have to stay, and if I have to stay, she controls the conditions of your staying." "Yes." He turned away from her. He walked to the desk and stood with his back to her, looking at the papers there, and the silence stretched in a way that was not uncomfortable, but was not easy either. The silence of two people thinking through something together in parallel, in a room where both of them were more exposed than they had intended. "I'm going to address this," he said. He did not turn around with respect. Sophia said, "The last 2 times you intervened, she escalated." He turned then. And the look on his face was not quite what she expected, not defensive, not dismissive, something that was almost, in the careful geography of his expressions, close to acknowledgement. "You're right," he said. The 2 words landed in the room with a weight that surprised her. She had not expected him to say them. She was not sure, from what she had observed of him, that he said them often. "Then what?" she asked. And for the first time in the 3 months she had worked in this house, Dante Morti looked at her with an expression she could not fully read, not the blankness, not the authority, not careful distance, something underneath all of those things, something that had perhaps always been underneath them, that she was only now close enough to see. "I don't know," he said, 3 words quietly spoken, entirely real. She stood in the study and looked at him, and felt the ground shift very slightly beneath her feet in a way that had nothing to do with the floor. He found her in the library again that evening. He had not gone looking for her. He had told himself this, and believed it for approximately the 40 seconds it took him to walk from his bedroom to the east wing and push open the door that was always slightly ajar. She was in the left-hand chair. The fire was lit tonight. She must have lit it, because no one else came here. The book in her lap was different from the Baldwin. He could not see the title. She looked up when he entered. Neither of them said anything for a moment. He went to the right-hand chair and sat in it. He reached past her to the small table between them where a second glass already sat. She had put it there, he realized, which meant she had been expecting him, or at least leaving the possibility open, and he poured from the bottle of whiskey that lived permanently on the shelf above the fireplace, a bottle his father had started, and no one had finished and no one had touched in 8 years. He poured 2 glasses. He handed her one. She took it. They sat in front of the fire in the 2 chairs that had been empty for 8 years, and the silence between them was different from all the other silences. It was not loaded with power or tension, or the careful navigation of their different positions in the world. It was simply quiet. 2 people, a fire, 2 glasses of very old whiskey, and the weight of a day that had asked a great deal of both of them. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. They sat. And outside the library windows the night was very dark and very still, and inside the room the fire was warm, and the whiskey was good, and the silence was the kind that does not need to be filled. This lasted for perhaps 20 minutes. Then Sophia said quietly, looking at the fire, "Tell me about your father." He went very still. She felt it, the sudden change in the quality of his stillness, the difference between the stillness of a man at rest and the stillness of a man who has been caught by something unexpected. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. "You don't have to," she said. "He died 8 years ago," Dante said. His voice was careful. "Heart attack. He was 59. She waited. He stopped, started again." He was not an easy man. He was hard in the way that men of his generation and his particular world were hard. He didn't explain himself. He didn't apologize. He expected things and didn't ask for them. A pause, but he was another stop, longer. Sophia watched his jaw tighten and release. He was present. Dante said finally, "Whatever else he was or wasn't, he was there. He came to things. He paid attention." He looked down at the glass in his hand. "When I was 12, I was in a school play, a terrible play. I had 6 lines and forgot 4 of them, and he sat in the front row the entire time, and when it was over, he came backstage and he said..." He stopped, the fire crackled. He said, "You did well." Dante's voice was completely even, which was objectively false, but he said it, and he looked up at the ceiling. "I have thought about those 3 words more times than I can count, more than any other thing he ever said to me." Sophia looked at him. He was still looking at the ceiling. "He sounds like someone worth missing," she said. And Dante Morti, who did not feel things in public, who had not, as far as anyone in his world could observe, felt things in any visible way for the better part of a decade, made a very small sound in the back of his throat that was not quite a response, and looked back at the fire and was silent for a long time. Sophia did not fill the silence. She held her glass and looked at the fire too, and let him have the silence the way you let someone have a thing they need without making it a transaction. And in the room that smelled of his father and whiskey and old paper, something shifted between them, quietly, without announcement, without drama, the way the most significant things often shift. Not a beginning, not yet, but no longer simply nothing. She found the envelope the next morning. It was on the floor outside her room, slid under the door sometime in the night, and it was unmarked. And when she opened it, she found a single sheet of paper, a letter, written by hand in Elena Morti's precise cursive, addressed not to Sophia, but to the directors of 3 of the largest domestic agencies in the city. It was a formal character reference, a negative one, detailed, specific, citing incidents that had not occurred, describing a pattern of behavior that was fabricated with enough particular detail to be convincing. It cited dates, it cited witnesses, staff members named by initials. It described Sophia as dishonest, difficult, and temperamentally unsuited to household service. At the bottom of the letter, in a different hand, not Elena's, a single line had been added. "This was drafted 3 days ago. It has not been sent. I thought you should know it exists. No signature, but she knew the handwriting." She stood in her doorway with the letter in her hands, and the morning light coming through the window at the end of the corridor, and she understood, with perfect clarity, what she was holding. It was not just a warning, it was a choice being placed in her hands. She could take it to him. She could use it. She could allow this to become something, a confrontation, a declaration, a moment where the careful distance between them collapsed into something neither of them could take back. Or she could fold it, put it away, carry it alone, the way she carried everything. She stood in the corridor for a long time. The light moved, she folded the letter, she put it in the drawer beside the photograph, and she went to work. 3 days passed. They were ordinary days on the surface, duties performed, meals served, the house running on its usual rhythms of obligation and appearance. Sophia moved through them with the precision she had developed over months, the careful economy of a person who has learned to exist in a space that is not entirely safe by making herself as predictable and unremarkable as possible. But something had changed in the quality of the air. She felt it the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives, not in any single observable thing, but in the pressure of the atmosphere, the particular stillness before something moves. Elena had been quiet, not warm, not even civil, but quiet, performing a restraint that felt less like peace and more like the held breath before a door opens. Dante had not come to the library. She had sat in the left-hand chair both evenings, the fire lit, the second glass on the table between the chairs, and he had not come, and she had told herself this was correct and appropriate and exactly what it should be, and she had believed herself for the duration of the evening, and then lain awake afterward with the letter in the drawer and the photograph face down, and the familiar weight of everything she was not allowing herself to feel pressing gently against her sternum. On the 4th day, Elena made her move. It happened at 10 in the morning, in the kitchen, in front of 4 members of staff. Sophia had been preparing a tray for one of Elena's guests, a woman who had arrived the previous evening for a 2-day visit, a close friend of Elena's from Rome named Signora Castellano, who had the particular manner of a person who has spent decades being agreed with, and has mistaken this for the natural order of things. Sophia was arranging the tray with the breakfast items when Alina entered the kitchen with Signora Castellano beside her, mid-conversation, and then stopped when she saw Sophia, and the stop was too deliberate to be accidental. "Ah," Alina said, "Sophia." She said the name with a warmth that was entirely performance. Signora Castellano was just asking about the household arrangements. Sophia turned from the tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Morty, Signora Castellano. I was telling her." Elena continued, moving further into the kitchen in a way that occupied the space and reoriented the room's attention, about the challenges of finding reliable staff. "It's such a difficulty, isn't it? You invest in training someone, in bringing them into your home, trusting them with your family's private life, and then they disappoint you." The kitchen was very quiet. The two other maids were very interested in what they were doing. The cook, a solid woman named Renata, who ran her kitchen with absolute authority, and had so far treated Sophia with the impersonal respect of someone who valued competence above everything else, had gone still at the stove. "We've had some difficulties," Elena said, looking at Sophia with an expression of pained honesty. "Haven't we, Sophia?" It was an invitation. To agree, to nod, to perform in front of a witness, the acceptance of a false narrative. Sophia looked at Elena Morty. She thought about the letter in her drawer. She thought about Katerina on the rocks by the sea. She thought about a 12-year-old boy in a terrible school play who forgot 4 of his 6 lines and heard 3 words afterward that he was still holding 30 years later. "I'm not aware of any difficulties with my work," Sophia said. Her voice was clear and calm. "If Mrs. Morty has specific concerns, I'd welcome the opportunity to address them properly." Elena's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. "Properly," she repeated with the appropriate people present. Sophia said, "And documented." The word documented landed in the kitchen like a stone. Signora Castellano's eyebrows moved. Elena looked at Sophia for a long moment with an expression that was, beneath its composed surface, something that Sophia recognized as the look of a person recalibrating, reassessing the obstacle in front of them. "Of course," Elena said finally, pleasantly, "I'll arrange that." She turned and ushered Signora Castellano back out of the kitchen, resuming her conversation in the corridor, and the door swung closed and the kitchen exhaled. Renata, at the stove, began stirring again without looking up. That was either very brave or very stupid. She said quietly, "To the pot." "Probably both," Sophia said. She turned back to the tray. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat on the counter for a moment, breathed, picked up the tray. She carried it out of the kitchen and up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs she almost walked directly into Dante Morty. He caught the tray, one hand moving with the fast, automatic precision of someone with good reflexes, steadying it before anything could fall. Their hands were both on the tray for a brief moment, his over hers, and the contact lasted approximately 2 seconds and felt much longer. He looked at her face. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing," she said. His eyes moved over her expression with the attention of a man reading something in a language he was only beginning to understand, but was learning faster than he had anticipated. "Sophia, I'm delivering breakfast," she said. "Excuse me." He let her go. She felt him watching her walk down the corridor. She did not look back. He found Aldo's report on his desk that afternoon. He had asked for it 3 days ago, and it had taken this long because Aldo was thorough, and because thoroughness in this particular case had uncovered things that required careful documentation. Dante sat at the desk and read the report from beginning to end without stopping, and when he finished, he set it down and sat very still for a while. The report confirmed what Sophia had told him and added considerably to it. The call to her sister had been made from a phone registered to the estate, one of the landlines in Elena's private wing. The timing was precise, made on an evening when Dante had been in Brussels and when Marta had been on her day off, meaning Elena had been operating without the usual witnesses. The conversation with the domestic agency, the one in which Elena had described Sophia as light, fingered, had been recorded inadvertently, by the agency's standard call, logging system, and Aldo had obtained a transcript through channels that Dante chose not to examine too closely. The transcript was worse than he had expected. Elena had not simply made a vague negative comment. She had constructed a detailed false narrative, specific incidents, specific dates, specific fabricated witnesses. She had done it with the precision of someone who had done this kind of thing before, who knew how it worked, who understood exactly how much detail was required to make a lie adhesive. Dante read it twice, then he picked up his phone and called his mother. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. "Dante," she said, warmly. "I need to see you," he said. "My study, now." A brief pause. "I'm with Adriana, now," he said. He set the phone down. He did not move from behind the desk. He sat with the report in front of him and his hands flat on the surface, and the particular quality of stillness that his staff recognized as the most dangerous version of him, not the cold, contained professional stillness, but something older and deeper, the stillness of a man who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the moment to deliver it. Elena arrived 7 minutes later. She was composed. She was always composed. She came in and took the chair across the desk from him, the visitor's chair, which she usually avoided, preferring to stand, preferring the mobility, and sat in it and looked at him with an expression that was managing to convey both openness and preparation. He slid the report across the desk. She looked at it. She did not touch it. "I know what that is," she said. "Then we don't need to go through it line by line," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Tell me why." Elena was quiet for a moment. She looked at the report on the desk and then at her son's face, and something moved through her expression that was complicated enough that even Dante, who knew her better than he knew almost anyone, could not fully parse it. "She's not right for this house," Elena said. "That's not an answer to the question I asked." "It is, actually." Elena's voice was still composed, still measured, but underneath it something had shifted, a frequency change barely perceptible. "She doesn't understand her place here. She looks at things she shouldn't look at. She stopped." Dante waited. "She looks at you," Elena said. "The room was very quiet, and you looked back," his mother said. "Don't think I haven't noticed. Don't think I haven't been watching this for 3 months." Dante said nothing. "She is a maid," Elena said. The word was not cruel in its delivery, but it was absolute. "She has a child somewhere, and no husband, and no prospects beyond what this household provides. She is not." She stopped again. Her jaw was tight. "She is not what this family needs. She is not what you need, and the longer you allow this, whatever this is to continue, the more damage it does to the family, to the name, to you." The silence afterward was the kind that had weight. Dante looked at his mother for a long moment. "What you did," he said finally to her daughter, "was necessary, was unforgivable." His voice did not rise. It simply became more itself, quieter, more precise, more completely without warmth. "She has a 9-year-old child, Elena, a child who was frightened, a child who did nothing." Elena's eyes flickered. "You called yourself," Dante said, "a woman who understands family, who understands what it means to protect the people you love." He leaned forward slightly. "You made a 9-year-old girl cry to win a power struggle with her mother. Think about what that is." Elena's composure held, but it held the way ice holds with visible effort, with the faint sound of something under pressure. "You're letting her make you sentimental," Elena said. "That is exactly what I'm trying to prevent." "You're not trying to prevent anything," Dante said. "You're trying to control something. You have been trying to control everything in this house since the day Father died, and most of the time I have allowed it because it costs me nothing and gives you something you need. But this," he touched the report, "this is not something I will allow." Elena stood up. She was very still, standing, and her face had the particular expression of a woman who is prepared for many versions of a confrontation, and is now encountering one she did not fully anticipate. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Be very careful what you decide here, because some decisions cannot be undone." "I know," Dante said. He looked at her steadily. "So do you, which is why you made sure the letter to the agencies was never sent. which is why, when the moment came, you hesitated. He held her gaze. Some part of you knows the difference between protecting this family and punishing someone who doesn't deserve it. I'd like to believe that part still matters to you. Elena Morty stood across the desk from her son and said nothing. Her hands at her sides were very still. Then she walked out, the door closed with a quiet, complete sound. Dante sat alone in the study for a long time. He thought about what his mother had said. She looks at you and you look back. He thought about a library at 5 in the morning. He thought about a garden in the late afternoon light, and a voice saying she called my daughter with that terrible controlled evenness. He thought about 2 chairs in front of a fire, and 20 minutes of silence, and the particular quality of that silence. The way it had felt like something being put down after a long time. Carrying it, he stood up, he went to find her. She was not in the library. She was not in the garden. She was not in the kitchen or the laundry room or any of the spaces he checked with a systematic efficiency that he would have found alarming in himself if he had been paying attention to himself, rather than to the task. He found her in the east corridor, outside the door to his father's old study, the door he always left slightly open, the door she had stood outside once, and he had watched her stand there and not enter, and he had said nothing, had simply observed it from a distance, and filed it somewhere he did not examine. She was sitting on the floor. Not dramatically, she was sitting with her back against the wall, and her knees drawn up, and her head leaning back against the plaster, and her eyes were closed, and she was breathing with particular conscious deliberateness of someone who has recently been through something difficult and is using breath to put themselves back together. He stopped in the corridor. She heard him. Her eyes opened. They looked at each other in the dim corridor, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Sophia said, without moving, "She came to find me after she left you." He went still. She was very composed. Sophia said, "She told me that she had spoken with you, that she understood your position, that she would, going forward, ensure that my working conditions here were appropriate." A pause. And then she said, Sophia stopped. She looked at the ceiling. She said that she hoped I understood what I was doing to him and to myself. Dante crouched down. He did not sit. He crouched, bringing himself to her level, which meant they were suddenly very close, closer than they had been in the garden, closer than they had been in the library, and the corridor was narrow, and the light was low, and there was nowhere for either of them to be that was not close. "What did you say?" he asked. Sophia looked at him. Her eyes were dry. They were almost always dry. He had noticed she cried in private or she did not cry, and either way she did not ask anyone to witness it. But her eyes now had the particular brightness of someone who was in the immediate vicinity of tears, without being willing to let them arrive. "I didn't say anything," she said, "because I don't know the answer." The corridor was very quiet. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. Her voice was low and completely honest, and without any performance of strength or composure. Just the truth held out in both hands. "I came here to work, to save enough money to bring my daughter home. That was the whole of it. That was everything." She looked at him. And then she stopped. He was very close. His eyes were on her face with an attention that was not his professional attention, not his strategic attention, not any of the forms of attention he deployed in the management of his world. It was something unguarded, and the fact of its unguardedness was more significant than anything he could have said. "And then," she said again, more quietly. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. He reached out. It was a slow movement, slow enough that she could have moved away, could have chosen the other option, could have made the decision that was probably the sensible and self-protective one. He raised one hand and very carefully, very gently, pressed it flat against her cheek. She went completely still. His hand was warm, her cheek was cold from the corridor. The contrast was, she did not have a word for what the contrast was. She looked at him, he looked at her. And whatever had been building between them for 3 months, in libraries and gardens and dinner tables and corridors, in silences and in the spaces between words, in the way he had said her name, for the first time in a voice she had never heard from him before, arrived quietly and completely and without any of the drama she might have expected, in this narrow corridor outside a door that was always slightly ajar. She raised her hand and covered his, just that, her hand over his palm against her face. The corridor, quiet around them. He closed his eyes. She watched his face do something she had not seen it do before, release. Just for a moment. Just a hairline fracture of release, the faintest softening of everything he held so tightly. And it was the most private thing she had ever witnessed, and she felt the privilege of it like a pressure behind her eyes. Then his phone rang. He did not move. It rang again. "You should answer it," she said quietly. He opened his eyes. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he stood. He answered the phone. His voice, when he spoke into it, was completely his professional voice, contained, authoritative, operational. He walked away down the corridor. Sophia sat with her back against the wall and one hand pressed to her own cheek, where the warmth of his hand still lived. She sat there for a long time. The door to his father's study was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could smell old paper and cedar and the very faint ghost of pipe tobacco. She pressed her hand more firmly against her cheek. And somewhere down the corridor, his voice continued low, even controlled, and she listened to it without being able to hear the words and felt, in some chamber of herself she had kept locked for 3 years, something turn over slowly in the dark. She almost left. The decision formed in the early hours of the following morning, in the particular clarity that comes at 3 a.m., when the defenses are down and the mind strips everything back to its essential truth. She lay in her narrow bed in the dark and looked at the ceiling and assembled the facts of her situation with the cold precision of someone who had learned, through necessity, to think clearly about painful things. She was a maid in a house owned by a family whose internal war she had somehow become the terrain of. She had a daughter on the coast who needed her to be stable, employed, and unentangled. She had spent 3 months surviving a campaign designed to diminish her, and she had survived it, and that survival had cost her more than she allowed anyone to see. And now there was a man with a life so far outside the boundaries of her own that the distance should have made the whole thing impossible, who had pressed his hand against her cheek in a corridor and closed his eyes, and she had covered his hand with hers, and neither of them had spoken about it since. She should leave. She knew she should leave. She reached into the drawer. She took out the photograph. She looked at her daughter's profile against the gray sea in the early morning light. That quality of absolute presence, that focused attention turned toward something in the water. "Kate," she thought, "I am doing this for you." But even as she thought it, she knew she was no longer doing only that. Somewhere in the last weeks, in libraries and gardens and corridors, in silences she had not wanted to end, something had begun that was no longer entirely about survival or strategy or the careful economics of her situation. Something had begun that was entirely its own thing, and entirely inconvenient, and entirely real. She put the photograph back. She did not sleep, and she did not leave. Morning came gray and heavy with the particular pressure of approaching rain, and the house woke into it with the usual routines, and Sophia moved through them with the usual precision, and Dante was at breakfast when she brought the coffee service to the dining room, alone, which was unusual, Elena apparently taking her morning meal in her rooms. She set the service on the sideboard. She felt him watching her. She turned to leave. "Sophia," he said. She stopped, turned back. He was sitting at the end of the table with a cup of coffee in front of him and a newspaper he had clearly not been reading, and he looked not quite like himself. He looked like a man who had also been awake at 3 in the morning, who had also been assembling facts in the dark and arriving at conclusions he was not entirely prepared for. "Sit down," he said. She looked at the chair across the table from him. "I'm working," she said. "I know, sit down." She sat. They looked at each other across the length of the table. The morning light was gray and flat through the windows, and rain began lightly to fall against the glass, and the sound of it filled the room with the kind of white noise that makes a space feel more private than it is. "I've spoken to an employment agency," he said. "A reputable one, not any that my mother has contact with. I have a reference prepared under my name, not the estate's. It will open any household in the city to you." He looked at the table. You would have your choice of positions. Better pay than here. Better, he stopped. Better circumstances. Sophia was very still. I've also, he continued without looking at her, spoken to my financial team. There is a property on the coast, a small one, nothing significant but appropriate, near your sister's town. It's currently empty and will remain so for the foreseeable future. I would like you to know that it's available, if you needed. He stopped again. His jaw tightened. If you wanted to bring your daughter home sooner than your current situation allows. The rain on the windows. Sophia looked at him. He was still not looking at her, looking at some middle distance above the table. The careful geometry of a man delivering something he had prepared and was now discovering was harder to deliver than it had been to prepare. Dante, she said. He looked at her. Are you trying to help me? She said slowly. Or are you trying to make it easier for me to go? The question landed in the room with a weight that neither of them had quite anticipated. He was quiet for a long moment. Both, he said, and the word was honest in a way that cost him something visible. Something she could see in the set of his shoulders and the particular quality of his stillness. Both, and I'm aware of what that makes me. What does it make you? A man, he said, who is not, he stopped. Started again. A man who has spent a long time constructing a life that does not accommodate certain things, and who is aware, perhaps for the first time in that long time, that the construction has a cost. The rain intensified slightly, the room was warm, the coffee was getting cold. You could have simply offered me the reference, Sophia said. You didn't need to tell me about the property. No, he said. Why did you? He looked at her. And in his face, in the particular unguarded geography of his face at this moment, in this gray morning room with the rain against the glass and the cold coffee between them, she saw something that she recognized because she had been carrying the same thing for weeks, pressed down beneath the professional composure and the careful management, and the absolute necessity of not letting it be real. He did not answer the question. He did not need to. She looked at him for a long time. My daughter's name is Katerina, she said. Her voice was quiet. She's 9. She collects sea glass. She has jars of it on the windowsill of my sister's house, sorted by color. She stopped, pressed her lips together. She is the most serious person I have ever met. She thinks about everything before she says it. She asks questions that I don't know how to answer. A pause. She asks about her father sometimes. I tell her what I can. I tell her that people are complicated, that love doesn't always mean someone knows how to stay. Dante was very still. I tell her, Sophia said, that the most important thing is not whether someone stays. The most important thing is whether they show up when it matters. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the complete, absolute attention of a man for whom this moment was rearranging something fundamental. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Not yet. Not because I can't, because I'm choosing not to. She held his gaze. I want to be very clear that it's a choice. Something moved in his face. I understand, he said. Good, she said. She stood. She picked up the coffee service. She walked to the door. At the door she stopped, and without turning around she said, The library, tonight, 8 o'clock. She did not wait for his response. She walked out. He was there at 7:45. The fire was lit. The 2 glasses were on the table. The whiskey bottle his father had started and no one had finished was open between them, a third of it remaining, as if it had been waiting all these years for exactly this. She arrived at 8 exactly. She sat in the left-hand chair. He was already in the right-hand one, which surprised her slightly. He had always entered the room after her, had always come to a space she had already occupied, and there was something about finding him already there, already waiting, that settled something in her chest. She poured. He watched her hands. She handed him his glass. Their fingers touched for a moment on the stem. Neither of them commented on this. I want to tell you something, he said. She waited. He looked at the fire. He was quiet for long enough that she began to understand this was not going to be easy for him, that whatever he was about to say had required the walk here and the early arrival, and perhaps the whole of the past weeks to build up to, and she felt the weight of that and sat quietly inside it, giving him the space he needed. I was engaged, he said, 7 years ago. She had not expected this. Her name was Juliana. She was appropriate. That's the word my mother used, appropriate. The right family, the right background, the right understanding of what this life required. He turned the glass in his hand. I thought I was in love with her. I believed I was for about a year. And then one evening we were at a dinner very much like the ones my mother hosts, and I looked across the table at her and I realized. He stopped. The fire crackled. I realized I had no idea who she was, he said. Not because she had hidden herself from me, but because I had never asked. I had accepted the appropriate version and never looked for anything underneath it. A pause, and I understood in that moment that I had been constructing a life in which I would never need to look for anything underneath anything, in which everything would be surface and function, and the correct appearance of things, and I had been not unhappy. That's too dramatic. I had been. He searched for the word. Absent, Sophia said quietly. He looked at her. Yes, he said, absent. The rain had stopped sometime in the last hour. The night outside the windows was very still. I ended the engagement. My mother was the word I'd use as incandescent. It confirmed for her what she had suspected, that I was incapable of making the choices that were required of me, that I was going to be a problem. He almost smiled, almost. She has spent 7 years since then managing that problem. And now there is me, Sophia said. And now there is you. They looked at each other. I'm not appropriate, she said, not with bitterness. Just stating a fact. No, he said. And the way he said it, the directness of it, the absence of apology, and underneath that absence the presence of something that was almost relief. You're not appropriate at all. The fire was warm, the whiskey was good. And the silence that followed was the particular silence of two people who have just told each other the truth and are sitting inside the aftermath of it, which is not comfortable exactly, but it's the closest thing to safe that either of them has felt in a very long time. He set down his glass. He looked at her with the complete attention that she had come to understand was the most significant thing he could offer, because he was a man who spent his days in rooms full of people who wanted his attention, and he gave them all the functional version of it, the professional version, the version that was enough to conduct business and manage people and maintain the architecture of his world. This was not that version. This was the version underneath. I want to know your daughter, he said. The words arrived so quietly and so unexpectedly that for a moment she simply looked at him, not certain she had heard correctly. I want to know the person who collects sea glass by color, he said, and asks questions you don't know how to answer. He stopped. The jaw tightened, released. I want to know what it looks like, a life that is actually present in itself. I want to know if I am still capable of that. He looked at his hands. I'm aware that this is a great deal to ask. I'm aware that I have very little to offer by way of ease. My life is not an easy thing to be near. I know that, Sophia said. And I'm aware, he continued, that I have spent approximately 3 months being by most observable measures not an easy person to be near. That I have been a pause. That I have not been particularly Dante, she said. He stopped. I know, she said, simply, the way she had said it in the library weeks ago, and it had landed in his chest with a weight he was still feeling. I know all of that. I've been here. He looked at her. You have, he said. The fire had burned lower. The room was darker. The whiskey was almost gone. He reached across the small table between the chairs. He held out his hand, palm up, open, not a command, not a gesture of authority, not any of the things his hands usually did in the world. Just an open hand held out in the low firelight in the room that smelled of his father. She looked at it. She thought about choices, about the ones you make in the dark at 3 in the morning, and the ones you make in firelit rooms with your eyes open. About her daughter's face turned toward something in the water, that quality of total presence, that refusal to look away from what was directly in front of her. She put her hand in his fingers closed around hers, gently, completely. They sat in front of the dying fire with their hands clasped between the chairs, and neither of them spoke, and the silence was the best silence yet. The silence of two people who have stopped pretending, who have put down the weight they were carrying and are simply sitting, for this moment, in the fact of each other. Outside, somewhere in the dark grounds of the estate, a night bird called once and fell silent. The fire settled into embers. They did not move. In the morning, Elena Morty came to the library. She had never, in Sophia's knowledge, come to the library. It was not a room she used or acknowledged or entered. And yet there she was, at 9 in the morning, standing in the doorway of the room that smelled of cedar and old paper and whiskey, and the particular warmth of two people who had sat beside each other in the firelight until the fire went out. Sophia was alone. She had come early, as she always did, and she was in the left-hand chair, and she had a book in her lap that she was not reading. Elena looked at the room, at the 2 glasses on the table, at the whiskey bottle, nearly empty. She looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at her. The silence between them was different from any silence they had shared before. It was not the silence of a campaign or a threat or a performance. It was something else, older, more complicated, the silence of a woman who has spent her life protecting something, and is standing at the edge of understanding that protection can become its own kind of damage. He hasn't smiled, Elena said finally, in 7 years. Sophia said nothing, not once. Elena's voice was very quiet. It was not the composed, weaponized quiet of their previous exchanges. It was something rower, something that cost her more. Since the engagement ended, since he withdrew from the version of himself that was, she stopped. He has been very efficient, very successful, very absent. She looked at the fireplace. His father used to say that the saddest thing in the world was a person who had decided not to feel anything, who had chosen absence over the risk of presence. The library was very still. I thought I was protecting him, Elena said, from something inappropriate, from a disruption, she looked at Sophia, and for one moment, one unguarded, uncalculated, entirely human moment, the mask was completely gone, and what was underneath it was not the woman who had made a 9-year-old girl cry. It was a mother, terrified, loving someone in the only way she had ever been taught to love, which was the wrong way, which was the way that looked like control. From getting hurt, Sophia looked at her. I know, she said. Elena made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite not one. She looked at the whiskey bottle for a moment. Then she looked at Sophia with an expression that contained, alongside everything else, something that was almost not quite, but almost respect. My son, she said, has never once in his adult life held out his hand to anyone. Sophia's breath caught. She had not realized Elena knew. She had not considered, had not thought that anyone had seen I'm his mother. Elena said simply, I see everything. She turned. She walked to the door. At the door she stopped. She did not turn around. The property on the coast, she said, if you wanted to bring your daughter here, to the city, instead of returning to the coast. A pause that contained multitudes. There is a school 2 streets from his building, an excellent one. I know the director. She walked out. The door swung gently shut behind her. Sophia sat in the left-hand chair in the library that no one used, with the embers of last night's fire still faintly warm in the grate and the morning light beginning to come through the windows. And she pressed one hand over her mouth and felt her eyes fill with the tears she had been not crying for 3 months. She let them come, just this once, just here in this room, alone with the old books and the 2 glasses and the last of her father's whiskey. She cried quietly and completely, and when she was done she sat very still and breathed, and then she picked up her book, and she was reading it, actually reading it, the words landing and staying. When she heard the door, she did not look up. She knew the sound of his footsteps. He came in. He went to the shelf. He picked up the whiskey bottle and looked at how little remained and set it back. He stood by the fireplace for a moment with his back to her. Then he turned. He looked at her. She looked at him. His eyes moved over her face in that particular way he had, reading, attending, learning the page. And she knew he could see that she had been crying. She did not look away. She did not arrange her face into anything it was not. He crossed the room. He sat in the right-hand chair. He reached across the table between them. She took his hand. Outside the library windows, the morning had gone bright and clean after the rain, the way mornings sometimes did on the other side of difficult nights, washed clear, newly itself, carrying the particular light of something that has come through something and arrived. She looked at their hands on the table between the chairs. She thought about her daughter's face turned toward the water. She thought about what it meant to be present in your own life, to turn toward what was directly in front of you and not look away. She looked up. "I need to call Kate this evening," she said. "I know," he said. "She's going to want to know." Sophia paused. "She asks a lot of questions." Something moved in his face. Slow and warm and entirely new, a movement she had not seen there before, that started somewhere deep and traveled all the way to the surface, and arrived as he smiled. Small, just barely, the kind of smile that looked like it was remembering how, but real, completely, undeniably real. She felt it, like a hand pressed warm against her cheek. She looked back at the window, at the bright morning, at the light that was new and clean and going nowhere. And somewhere on the coast, in a house full of sea glass sorted by color, a 9-year-old girl with her mother's eyes was already awake, already turned toward the window, already watching something. In the water with that absolute attention already, in some way she could not yet name, waiting. The library was quiet. The morning was bright. His hand was warm in hers. And one question remained, one thread left deliberately, carefully open, because some things are not meant to be resolved in a single morning, in a single room, in a single breath. She had not told him about the drawer, about the photograph face down beside the letter she had never used, about the morning. She had chosen to fold it away instead of walking through the door he had left open, about what it meant that she had made that choice and what it might mean, going forward, that she was finally ready to make a different one. She would tell him, not today, but soon. Some things were worth the waiting. Some things arrived only when you had stopped trying to control when they arrived, when you put down the weight you had been carrying and held out your hand in the firelight and let what was real be real. He looked at her. She looked at him, and the morning held them both quietly in its bright and patient light.